Welcome, the chosen ones. When a chosen one opens their mouth, kingdoms tremble not because they shout, but because they expose what was never supposed to be heard. Let that sink in. Before we dive deep, let me take a moment to say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to everyone who's supported this message through the Super Thanks feature. Whether you've given a little or a lot, know that your seed carries supernatural impact. And if you haven't donated, but you're still here watching, listening, sharing, praying, you are just as important. Your presence is felt, your energy is sacred, and your role in this movement, divine. So, whether you give or not, you're deeply loved and valued. That's facts. Now here's something to shake your spirit awake. Some of history's biggest revolutions didn't begin with armies or fire. They began with a sentence. One sentence. One truth that couldn't be buried any longer. A voice that refused to be silenced. And that's you. You didn't just speak. You released something spiritual. You unleashed a sound wave that shattered illusions. You dropped verbal grenades that exposed generational strongholds, collapsed manipulative structures, and made secret haters panic in silence. Your words didn't just echo, they thundered through realms. One sentence from you rewired the atmosphere. One confession turned fake friends into exposed enemies. One bold statement took the mask off people who depended on your silence to survive. They didn't see it coming, but heaven did. Now, they're gasping for control, rewriting their scripts, playing innocent in the stories they authored against you. But let's be clear, the second you spoke, the entire battle shifted in your favor. And no, we won't downplay it. We won't pretend this was just a moment. This was a move of God, a divine eruption, and if they didn't want the thunder, they should have never provoked the storm inside you. So grab your tea, tighten your armor, and open your spirit, because what you said wasn't just brave, it was chosen, it was prophecy, it was necessary, and if you know exactly what it feels like to be silenced, doubted, and then come back, swinging with one sentence that changed everything, comment 999 right now, so the world knows. You are part of this remnant, this awakening, this holy fire. Let's begin. God's chosen ones. That one bold sentence shifted the battle in your favor. Number one, that one sentence wasn't just your truth. It was a spiritual earthquake that ended centuries of silence. God's chosen one. Do you even realize what you did? You weren't just standing up for yourself in that moment, you were standing on sacred ground. The words you finally spoke weren't simply your own. They were carried on the backs of generations before you. That bold sentence that left your mouth was centuries in the making. It echoed with the pain of the unheard, the cries of the unseen, and the prayers of the faithful who never got to witness justice. You cracked open a sealed chamber that entire bloodlines had learned to ignore, and whether you knew it or not, heaven held its breath as you did it. Have you ever wondered why your voice shook the atmosphere? Why the room went silent, like time itself paused to listen? Because you were not just releasing your own story, you were releasing the spiritual weight of ancestors who were denied theirs. That wasn't just a personal confession. That was a generational deliverance. What was once buried beneath shame, trauma, and silence finally got to rise through your voice. And when truth rises, nothing remains the same. For the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. The moment you spoke, strongholds cracked. The system that had thrived on secrecy whether it was your family, your church, your job, or your entire community, began to unravel. Why? Because that system was glued together by silence, and you broke it with one sentence of truth. You didn't just speak, you detonated, and suddenly, what had survived for decades in darkness was now burning under the light of truth. Have you ever seen how mold reacts when exposed to light? It shrinks, it stinks, and it tries to hide. That's what your truth did to every lie that tried to keep you bound. Let's pause here. Did you think you were just being brave? No. You were being chosen. And being chosen comes with consequences. Look at Harriet Tubman when she spoke up and moved. People followed. When whistleblower Jeffrey Wigand exposed the tobacco industry's lies, he wasn't trying to be a hero. He was simply tired of the silence. When Simone Biles withdrew from competition to protect her mental health, it shook the world, not because she was weak, but because her choice exposed how deeply we are taught to suffer in silence. Are you seeing the pattern now? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John Shmona, Shloshim Vishtaim. But here's the thing, freedom isn't free. The moment you opened your mouth, you didn't just unlock your chains, you rattled everyone else's. You became a living reminder that truth is more powerful than appearance. And some people don't want to be reminded. That's why the energy shifted. That's why they tried to gaslight you. They weren't reacting to what you said. They were reacting to what your voice disrupted. Their fake peace, built on the backs of the voiceless, couldn't hold up under your honesty. Does it make sense now why they tried to silence you again so quickly? Because your words didn't just reveal, they activated. You gave other people permission to feel what they had buried. Your courage sparked questions in their souls. How many people around you started whispering, "Me too," when they heard your story? How many began to reevaluate what they had been swallowing their entire lives? Look at Esther. She didn't plan to be a voice for her people. But when the moment came, she realized her silence would cost more than her comfort. One bold sentence to the king, risking her life, shifted the fate of a nation. What if your sentence did the same? What if the shift you caused was heaven-backed and time-aligned? Perhaps you were born for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. And don't think for a second that the enemy didn't notice. That's why you felt the backlash. That's why some people suddenly changed toward you. It's not because you were wrong. It's because you were right. So right, it disrupted their illusion of control. It exposed that they were never in charge of the story God was. And now, through you, His truth is being heard. Think of Monica Lewinsky, who after years of humiliation, stepped back into the public eye with power, grace, and a voice that now educates millions about shame culture. What tried to destroy her, God is using to deliver others. Isn't that the same story that's starting to unfold for you? The Lord is on my side. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Psalm 118:6. You're still standing, aren't you? Even after the spiritual earthquake, even after the backlash, the whispers, the attempts to twist your truth into something shameful, you're still here, and you're more awake than ever. That's not just resilience, that's divine confirmation. And just like Malala Yousafzai, who turned her trauma into a worldwide platform for education and justice, you are now walking proof that truth doesn't die. It multiplies, it spreads, it strengthens others who were too afraid to begin. Do you realize how many people are watching you? Not for entertainment, but for courage. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. Isaiah 61:1. That's the spirit you carry now, whether they understand it or not. Your words were a holy disruption. They didn't just move air. They moved spiritual principalities. And the world around you, though confused, is reacting to it. Your truth rearranged something deep in the atmosphere. It changed the rules of engagement. What used to be tolerated is no longer acceptable. What used to be covered up can't hide anymore. So here's the final question. Chosen One, what if the reason things haven't been the same since you spoke is because they were never meant to be? What if your voice was always destined to break chains that others didn't even realize were locked? The truth is, you've already shifted the battle. You spoke, and heaven echoed. And while some may still be angry, they didn't get to choose which chains broke. First, God did, and He chose you to speak the sentence that changed everything. Number 2. Your voice became the evidence heaven had been waiting for to open the case. Chosen One, you may have thought you were just releasing pressure from your chest, just finally saying something you should have said years ago. But in that sacred moment, when you finally spoke, the universe didn't just listen, it documented. The spiritual realm paused, marked the time, and said, "This is the moment we've been waiting for." Your words didn't vanish into the air like steam. They were absorbed by realms unseen. They were filed in divine archives. Why? Because your voice was more than sound. It was evidence. It was spiritual proof that injustice had occurred, and now heaven had the authority to respond. Doesn't that make you pause? Before you ever opened your mouth, your suffering was real, but in the eyes of many, it was invisible. The pain was there, but it was undocumented. To outsiders, it was just mood swings, overthinking, or bitterness. But the moment you gave it a voice, you gave it form. You gave your invisible wounds structure, breath, and undeniable presence. Can you feel how sacred that was? For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. Your voice did what silence could never do. It brought the hidden to light, and when you spoke, something in the heavens shifted, because truth carries frequency. It travels, it penetrates, it creates movement. In that moment, you were not just being vulnerable, you were filing a spiritual motion. You were pressing charges in the court of the Most High. That's why the energy in the room changed. That's why certain people looked away, fidgeted, or even got angry. Because, without naming names, your truth began summoning accountability. Do you remember who got uncomfortable the fastest? That discomfort wasn't coincidence. The spiritual world responds to truth like metal responds to fire. It heats, it exposes, it melts away the false structure and reveals what's underneath. That's why your words had so much power. You didn't just talk, you tore veils. And suddenly, even those who claimed innocence began to shift in their seats. Truth doesn't require you to explain every detail. It only requires that you speak it. And the energy it carries will find its target. It confronts without needing an invitation. Look at Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement. Her voice, born from trauma, became documentation. It gave millions of silenced people around the world a language. That ripple wasn't just social, it was spiritual. Doesn't that sound familiar to what's happening around you now? But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amos 5:24. Justice can't roll unless something triggers it. And your voice was the trigger. The words you spoke gave permission for heaven to respond, not just to your story, but to the stories of others connected to yours. In spiritual law, silence often protects the oppressor. But once truth is declared, the rules change. You flip the switch, you open the file, and now divine surveillance has gone live. Yes, heaven is watching in real time, tracking every injustice, monitoring every attempt to distort what you said. And do you know what that means? It means you're no longer fighting alone. Think of Anita Hill. She didn't just testify in a court of law. Her words testified in a spiritual courtroom. And decades later, her courage is still referenced in conversations about dignity and voice. Your voice is echoing in the same way. You may not yet see the outcome, but the ripple has already started. Are you ready for the results you haven't even prayed for yet? The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus pais presece, pais presece. You spoke, and now God is moving. You shifted the spiritual atmosphere so profoundly that even your silence carries more weight than some people's shouting. Do you understand how powerful that is? You don't need to argue or over-explain. Your voice has already released what needed to be said. And now, angels are acting on your behalf. Compensation has been triggered. Protection has been deployed. The scales of justice are tipping, not because someone took your side, but because heaven heard your truth and said, now we can act. It's the same with Nelson Mandela. His voice was evidence. It carried the weight of years spent in chains. And yet, when he spoke, it shook the foundations of a broken nation and helped rebuild it with hope. The spiritual weight behind his words carried a force history could not ignore. Isn't that what's happening in your life too? Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Jeremiah 33:3. Heaven is responding. Doors are opening behind the scenes. People who betrayed you are now being revealed, not because you exposed them, but because your voice released a frequency that makes masks fall. Your declaration activated angelic response teams. You may not see them, but they are there. You may not hear movement, but the ground under your feet is shifting. Even someone like Amanda Gorman, standing at the U.S. Capitol, used her voice as evidence that healing was possible after deep division. Her poem wasn't just art, it was spiritual documentation, publicly recorded and powerfully received. You've done something similar in your own world, and it's shaking things. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 47:3. Don't underestimate what you've done. That moment you released, your voice wasn't just an emotional vent. It was a sacred act of spiritual alignment. It documented truth in a realm that had been waiting for your permission to move. You invited light into spaces that had been guarded by shadows. And now that the light is in, the dark can't stay the same. So I'll ask you this. What if the very reason things felt heavier right after you spoke is because spiritual forces were rearranging themselves on your behalf? What if what looked like loss was actually God clearing the board for your justice to unfold, God's chosen one? Believe this, your voice did not disappear. It didn't go unnoticed. It was sacred evidence, filed in heaven, triggering divine movement in your favor. The shift has already begun. Trust the process. The spiritual legal system is in motion, and you, brave one, gave it the final piece of proof it needed to begin. Number 3. Your story wasn't just truth, it was the final blow that collapsed their empire of lies. Chosen one. You may not have realized it at the time, but your voice wasn't just a release, it was a reckoning. What you said didn't just shift opinions, it shifted dimensions. You thought you were just trying to breathe, to reclaim your peace, to clear the air. But what you actually did was crack the foundation of a system built on deception. Your story was the final straw, the one thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire fabric they had stitched together so carefully. And now, their illusion is falling apart, thread by thread, and it's all because you told the truth. When you spoke, it wasn't out of vengeance. It wasn't some grand performance. You didn't scream. You didn't exaggerate. You didn't even have to name names. But the weight of your clarity, it hit like divine lightning. You spoke with the kind of accuracy that only someone who had lived through years of denial, confusion, and spiritual war could possess. And that precision, it scared them. Why? Because clarity leaves no room to hide, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11, your words did exactly that. They weren't vague, they were vivid. They didn't come from speculation, they came from memory. And memory, when it refuses to be reshaped or silenced, becomes one of the most powerful tools of justice. The moment you said it, something sacred happened. The spell they cast over others began to lose its grip. The fake alliances they built, the carefully curated reputations they polished, the stories they rehearsed, they all started to crumble. And you didn't even raise your voice. You simply raised your truth. Think of whistleblowers like Sharon Watkins, who exposed Enron from the inside. Her internal memo became a wildfire that couldn't be contained. Or look at author Chanel Miller, whose powerful victim impact statement against her attacker went viral not because it was loud, but because it was specific, elegant, and undeniable. What made them dangerous wasn't that they were aggressive, it was that they were right. So right that the lie couldn't survive in the same room as their truth. Isn't that what happened to you? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. You didn't plan to expose anyone. You weren't trying to be a threat. You were just trying to tell your side, to finally breathe. But when the light in you began to speak, everything around you that had thrived in darkness started trembling. You didn't need to manipulate. You didn't need to convince. You didn't need to drag anyone. All you did was tell the truth, and it was too pure to ignore. Have you ever noticed how quickly they started to panic? The shift in their tone, the damage control, the excuses. That wasn't guilt, it was fear. Because they knew what you said wasn't fiction. It was surgical. It cut deep. You didn't guess. You didn't theorize. You remembered. And you remembered too much. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Ecclesiastes 12:14. Your words forced judgment to begin. People around them started doing double takes. That slick charm that used to work, it started failing. The mask they wore began to crack, not because you were dramatic, but because your truth exposed how thin the performance always was. And once people see the cracks, they can't unsee them. That's what scares them now. Not what you said, but the fact that others finally believe it. Think of Meghan Markle's interview with Oprah. She didn't scream. She didn't name call. She simply shared her lived experience. And yet the fallout was enormous, not because of what was said, but because of how clearly it was said. Your story carries the same weight. It rearranged social dynamics. It forced people to pick sides. It dismantled what others thought was untouchable. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. Isaiah 54:17. Your story didn't need armor. It was the armor. It stood on its own. And now, as the dust settles, the empire they built with lies, manipulation, and performance is collapsing. Their version of events is no longer the dominant narrative. People are starting to connect dots they had ignored for years. And guess what? You were the missing piece. Your clarity confirmed what others were too afraid to admit. Do you realize how powerful that is? Even look at someone like Tyler Perry, who was once homeless and voiceless, but told his story so honestly that it dismantled stereotypes and built an empire of truth in its place. His voice exposed poverty, abuse, and redemption, and gave millions permission to do the same. You are on that path. You are becoming that force. It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure. Psalm Shemona Esera Shloshim Vishtaim. Chosen one. Don't doubt the impact of what you did just because people are pretending to be unaffected. They feel it. They just don't know how to respond. That's why they're spiraling. That's why you've seen random shifts in behavior, strange alliances, or sudden silence. It's all part of the spiritual fallout. Your words didn't just challenge their story. They destroyed it. You didn't throw grenades. You held up a mirror. And the reflection? It scared them, not because it was exaggerated, but because it was true. You were never trying to burn down their image. You were just trying to survive the fire they lit. But in doing so, your story revealed that they were never as clean, as innocent, or as noble as they claimed. So here's the question. What if the very thing they tried to bury you with was the truth God used to resurrect you? What if your honesty was never just for you, but for every other person silently watching, waiting to be brave? Your voice wasn't random. It was divinely timed. And now they are dealing with the consequences of what you carried. Their kingdom is falling not because you wished for their downfall, but because they built it on sand. And your truth came like a flood. You were the final straw. And heaven made sure it landed exactly where it needed to. Number 4. You spoke without permission, and heaven backed you because the revolution needed your voice. God's chosen one. You didn't ask. You didn't raise your hand. You didn't wait for a nod from the ones who thought they ran the room. You simply opened your mouth, and that act alone shattered the hierarchy they were trying to protect. You see, they built the entire structure, assuming you'd stay silent. They crafted a system where you were expected to play your role. Smile through the dysfunction. Stay pleasant. Stay passive. And most importantly, stay quiet. You were never supposed to speak. That was the unspoken contract. Stay obedient or be ostracized. Smile or suffer. But the moment you broke that agreement, the entire spiritual atmosphere shifted. And why did it shake them so badly? Because you didn't ask for permission first. You didn't bow. You didn't wait for a platform. You didn't submit your pain for approval. You bypassed every gatekeeper and walked straight into truth. And not just any truth, but yours. Lived, felt, fought through, and survived. Your voice was not rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It didn't follow their script. It came out raw, real, and wrapped in holy rebellion. That's what made it revolutionary. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why that one choice to speak rattled so many? We must obey God rather than human beings. Acts 5:29. You obeyed a higher call, and in doing so, you violated their silent rulebook. The ones who claimed to value honesty suddenly labeled you difficult. The ones who praised transparency suddenly called you divisive. Why? Because you were no longer benefiting their illusion. You weren't there to protect the narrative or keep reputations clean. You came to tell the truth. And truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs a vessel willing to carry it. No matter the cost. They only give platforms to the ones who will perform, the ones who will polish the script, cushion the blow, and keep the skeletons hidden in the closet. But you, chosen one, refused the puppet strings. You stepped into the scene and flipped the script entirely. You didn't come to please. You came to purge. You didn't come to impress. You came to reveal. That's why they panicked, not because you lied, but because you didn't. You told the truth exactly how it happened. And you did it like someone who had already lost too much to care about their opinions anymore. Doesn't that sound like the definition of divine liberation? The righteous are as bold as a lion. Proverbs 28:1. That's the energy you walked in with. Lion-level boldness. And the world isn't used to that, especially when it comes from the one they expected to stay in the background. Think about Rosa Parks. She didn't shout. She didn't throw punches. She simply refused to move, and her silence echoed louder than any speech. Or consider Colin Kaepernick. He didn't give a long monologue. He took a knee, and his quiet defiance became an international conversation. It's not always noise that causes revolution. Sometimes it's the courage to say one thing no one expected you to say. And you? You didn't even say it loudly, but you said it clearly. And clarity like that is dangerous in a world built on distortion. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything more comes from the evil one. Matthew 5:37. They weren't ready for your clarity. They were banking on your silence. They were comfortable when you were hiding, shrinking, and performing. But the second you spoke without their permission, you bypassed the system. You broke the gate. You flipped the lights on. And the worst part for them? It worked. Because truth doesn't need a title. It doesn't need validation. It just needs to be spoken, and once it is, it can't be unheard. People started questioning what they had blindly accepted. Your voice became a mirror, and once people saw the cracks, the mask stopped working. You didn't knock politely. You kicked the door off its hinges, and when they turned to see who had the nerve to do it, it was you, the one they underestimated, the one they thought they had trained to obey. Have you noticed how fast they scrambled, how their energy shifted? Suddenly, you became the threat, not because you changed, but because they could no longer control your voice. That's the power of revelation. It doesn't destroy truth. It destroys the lie that tried to bury it. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm. Then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. Your voice wasn't rebellious. It was redemptive. You weren't acting out. You were stepping into authority. Spiritual authority. Prophetic clarity. Divine assignment. And what's wild is you weren't even trying to be anyone's hero. You were just trying to breathe. But that breath carried weight, and it cleared the air not just for you, but for others who didn't know they were suffocating. Think of Brittany Packnett Cunningham, the educator and activist who once said, "You can't be what you can't see." Your voice made others see. It made them question, doubt, awaken. And even if they never thank you for it, you've planted seeds that will grow long after the noise settles. You've activated minds. You've broken cycles. Do not call to mind the former things, or ponder things of the past. Behold, I will do something new. Isaiah 43:18-19. You weren't trying to take anything from them. You were trying to take yourself back. And in doing so, you showed others how to do the same. You didn't need their approval. You didn't need their applause. You weren't trying to be invited to the table. You flipped the table. And now they're left trying to clean up what your courage revealed. So let me ask you, What if your refusal to ask for permission was the very thing that gave others permission to wake up? What if your story was never meant to be whispered in the corner, but declared in the open for all to hear? What if God was just waiting for someone brave enough to speak when silence was expected? They didn't plan for you to speak, but heaven did, and now it's too late to silence you. Number 5. They turned your silence into a weapon, but you reforged it into a sword. And now they're bleeding from its truth. God's chosen one. They thought your silence meant defeat. They mistook your quietness for weakness, your stillness for surrender. But what they didn't understand was that you weren't silent because you were scared. You were silent because you were studying. You were gathering every detail, measuring every move, and letting truth mature inside you like fire inside a furnace. While they played pretend with your story, you were sharpening your discernment. And when you finally broke the silence, it didn't come as a whisper. It came like thunder, like judgment, like a blade slicing through every lie that had dared wear your name. They used your silence like a blank canvas and painted themselves as heroes, victims, saints, anything but the villains they knew themselves to be. They told people you were unstable, bitter, too sensitive, or simply difficult. And without your voice in the mix, their stories filled the room, unchecked. Do you realize how often people confuse silence with guilt, or worse, with consent? That's what they counted on. As long as you said nothing, they had all the power. Your silence became their shield and their sword. But that was their mistake. Because you weren't silent out of submission, you were silent out of strategy. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus pais presece, pais presece. Stillness doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. And while they performed in public, your silence was working in private. Every lie they told, every look they gave, every rumor they spread, your spirit caught it, and it remembered. Silence became your archive, and when the moment came to speak, you didn't speak from emotion, you spoke from divine precision. Look at someone like Taylor Swift. For years, she endured public narratives spun without her consent, particularly during her feud with media figures and music executives. But when she finally broke her silence, she didn't come with gossip. She came with receipts, clarity, and a story that reshaped her entire public image. She turned years of silence into a strategic testimony. Sound familiar? He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. 1 Corinthians 4-5. When you finally spoke, chosen one, your words weren't soft, they were surgical. You dismantled falsehoods brick by brick, not with rage, but with revelation. That's what made your truth undeniable. It didn't scream, it cut. And what terrified them wasn't your voice, it was that you had remembered everything. You didn't just speak, you exposed. You showed the world that your silence wasn't passive, it was prophetic. It was the prelude to justice. Have you noticed how they started scrambling the moment you said even one clear thing? They never expected you to survive, let alone speak. That's why they panicked. They thought they had the upper hand because they were louder, more social, more in control of the narrative. But when you began to speak, the entire game board flipped. Your truth didn't just defend you, it devoured their lies. And now, they're choking on the stories they wrote while you were still healing. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. Isaiah 54:17. That's exactly what happened. Every accusation, every twisted tale, they used your silence to prop up. You refuted it not with revenge, but with revelation. You didn't have to stoop to their level. Your truth stood taller than their facade ever could. The silence they once used against you has now become the very sound of their unraveling. They can no longer lie with confidence. They can no longer pretend with ease. Because you've cut through the illusion, think about Monica Lewinsky, who was silenced and ridiculed for years. But when she chose to reclaim her voice, she didn't just speak, she educated. She used the silence that once tormented her and transformed it into influence, dignity, and power. Your story is moving in that same direction. Are you beginning to see the pattern? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1. Noah, your courage isn't just for you, it's for the others, watching silently from the sidelines, wondering if they too will ever be free. Your voice has given their pain permission to rise. You've shifted the atmosphere, not just socially, but spiritually, because what you've done is not just personal, it's prophetic. You didn't just speak to defend yourself. You spoke to destroy everything that was built on your back, your name, and your silence. Look at Malala Yousafzai, shot for seeking education. Her silence forced upon her became a global battle cry. When she recovered and spoke out, the entire world shifted. She became a symbol of truth, spoken in the face of tyranny. Doesn't that remind you of what God is doing with you? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:8. You didn't come for revenge. You came for release. And yet, your release became their reckoning. The lies they told no longer hold weight. The masks they wore are melting in the heat of your clarity. And no matter how hard they try to push your truth back into the shadows, it's too late. It's out. It's alive. It's moving. So let me ask you, what if your silence wasn't a weakness, but a setup? What if God had you quiet just long enough for your voice to be impossible to ignore when the time came? What if the silence they weaponized was always meant to become the sword that set you free? You were never powerless. You were gathering power, and now, the silence they used to dominate the narrative has become the weapon you used to dismantle it. You didn't just win the battle, you rewrote the entire war. Number 6. You didn't mean to lead, but your voice became a map for those wandering in the dark. God's chosen one. You weren't trying to become anyone's guide. You weren't out to become a symbol or a spiritual compass. You were just surviving, just speaking, just trying to put words to what you had endured so it wouldn't eat you alive. But the moment those words left your mouth, something miraculous happened. Without knowing it, you dropped a trail of light behind you, a path others could follow. You see, when you told your truth, it didn't just echo, it illuminated, and in that light, others saw pieces of themselves for the first time. Have you ever realized how far your words have traveled? How many people have quietly said to themselves, "That's me." After hearing what you shared, you weren't trying to inspire, you were trying to breathe. But even in your bleeding, you gave direction to those who had no language for their pain. You became a mirror for the ones lost in spiritual fog. The moment you spoke, you helped others see, not just you, but themselves. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. It's not that you were perfect, it's that you were honest. Your story didn't come wrapped in victory, it came wrapped in rawness. And because of that, people didn't just relate to your words, they recognized their own struggle inside them. That's the difference. You didn't preach from the mountaintop, you spoke from the valley, and in doing so, you gave the valley a name. You gave form to what had been haunting others for years, abuse that left no bruises, manipulation that came in the disguise of love, confusion dressed up as loyalty. Think of author and speaker Brené Brown. She didn't rise by telling people how to be perfect. She rose by daring to be vulnerable. She gave people permission to embrace their imperfection, to stop hiding behind shame, just like you. She didn't come with all the answers. She came with realness. Isn't that what you've been doing all along? The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him, though he may stumble. He will not fall. Psalm Shaloshim Vesheba, Asrim Veshalosh, Asrim Ve'arba. You may not have noticed it, but as you stumbled forward, others were watching, and those who thought they were broken beyond repair suddenly realized they weren't alone. The confusion they felt, you gave it words. The torment they couldn't explain, you described it. You made it visible, and that gave them power, because once pain is named, it can be healed, and healing, for many, started with you. Have you ever asked yourself how many people were surviving in silence, believing their pain was unique until you broke open your story? How many were gaslit into thinking they were crazy until you gave their chaos a definition? That's the spiritual significance of what you've done. You thought you were just sharing, but heaven saw you mapping freedom. Look at mental health advocate Matt Haig, who once stood on the edge of suicide and later wrote about his journey with startling honesty. He never expected his pain to help others, but his books have become lifelines for those struggling with depression and anxiety. The voice that once trembled in darkness is now a torch, lighting the way for others. Can you see the same pattern in your own path? He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 140 And God chose you as part of that healing, not through perfection, but through testimony. You didn't come offering neat, polished advice. You came as someone still in process, still healing, still honest. And that's why your voice struck so deep, because people don't follow perfection, they follow truth. And yours came soaked in pain, courage, and holy defiance. Your truth wasn't just yours anymore. It became a bridge. Even think of actor Terry Crews, who broke cultural silence by opening up about trauma and abuse. His vulnerability didn't just free him, it emboldened others, especially men, to break free from shame and hidden pain. Like you, he didn't expect to be a voice for the voiceless, but when he stepped up, a movement followed. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe. Psalm 140. That's what you've done. You've told your story. And because of that, the lost now have landmarks. The confused have clarity. The wounded have language. You gave direction not by giving instructions, but by surviving out loud. You didn't wait until you were fully healed to speak. You spoke while still bleeding, and that is what made it holy, because it proved you didn't need to have it all together to be used by God. Look at singer Demi Lovato, who turned her raw battles with addiction and mental health into a message of hope. Her vulnerability made millions feel less alone, and you, chosen one, are walking that same anointed path. You've become living proof that honesty heals and truth delivers. Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path. Psalm 145. You thought your words were for you. You thought your healing was personal. But what heaven saw was a blueprint, a spiritual GPS signal that others would quietly lock onto when they didn't know which way to go. That's the power of your obedience. Your voice didn't just make noise, it created navigation. So let me ask you this. What if your pain was the very compass someone else needed to find their way home? What if your story is saving people who will never meet you, never thank you, but are breathing deeper today because you went first? You didn't just break your silence. You broke chains. You didn't just speak your truth. You built a path of deliverance. And now, whether you know it or not, others are walking in freedom because you were brave enough to bleed in public. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a signpost. And your life is proof that healing is not only possible, it's contagious. Number 7. You didn't just break their control, you shattered the illusion and revealed the chaos they were hiding all along. God's chosen one. You need to understand the gravity of what you did when you finally told the truth, raw, unfiltered, and with no apology. You didn't just remove their control. You pulled the mask off their entire identity. They weren't ready for that. Why? Because they had never imagined you'd actually say it out loud. Your silence had given them power for so long that they assumed they'd trapped you permanently in fear. But when you finally spoke, you didn't just expose a moment. You tugged on the thread, holding their whole performance together, and the unraveling was immediate. It wasn't the truth that shocked people the most. It was their reaction to it. Their response didn't look calm, wise, or mature. It looked chaotic, irrational, desperate. The lies came flying. The manipulation came fast. They tried to rewrite history, to cast you as unstable, dramatic, or delusional. But the more they tried to silence your truth, the more they exposed themselves. The wicked flee though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. Proverbs 28:1. They weren't fleeing because you attacked them. They were running from the mirror. Your words held up. You didn't scream. You didn't accuse. You just spoke the truth. And that was enough to make them spiral. That's how fragile their entire persona really was. One honest sentence from you, and suddenly they were activating every manipulative tactic in the book. Have you wondered why they reacted so loudly, so violently, so immediately? It's because your truth didn't just touch the surface, it reached the root. It wasn't a small cut, it was a deep, surgical incision into the core of their illusion. And when people build their identity on deception, truth isn't just uncomfortable, it's lethal to their false image. Look at whistleblowers like Reality Winner. She didn't leak 1 million documents. She exposed one major truth, and the system's reaction was swift and severe. Why? Because the truth destabilizes lies, even if it's only a sentence. That's the same force your voice carried. Your words didn't need to be long. They only needed to be real. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. And your freedom came at the cost of their false image. That's what hurt them the most. Not that you spoke, but that you did it without fear. They needed your silence like a drug. It kept them safe, composed, respectable. But once you removed it, they began to unravel. The control they thought they had over the narrative vanished. And what was left in its place? Madness. Suddenly, the mask they wore so confidently turned into glass. And your words shattered it. People started seeing them for what they truly were, not because you tried to destroy their image, but because their reaction exposed them. They couldn't keep it together. The rage, the obsession, the smear campaigns, the sudden performative tears. It was a spectacle. And the irony, you didn't tell on them. They told on themselves. For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. Mark 4:22. Think about Amber Heard's high-profile court battle. The more she tried to spin the story, the more the public watched it all unravel under the weight of her own contradictions. It wasn't Johnny Depp's lawyers who made the greatest case. It was her own behavior. And your situation mirrors this. Their desperate reaction to your calm truth told everyone what was real. Now people are looking at them differently. That polished image they held so tightly is full of cracks, because what people once admired as confidence is now seen as control. What once looked like dignity now looks like desperation. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:7. You were never looking for war. You weren't trying to destroy anyone. You were just trying to walk in truth. But they couldn't let that happen, because truth is dangerous to people who live in deception. And when you told your side, not with bitterness, but with clarity, you took away their favorite weapon, fear. You removed the one ingredient they needed to maintain control: your silence. Think of Britney Spears. For years, she was framed as unstable, unfit, broken. But once her voice was finally heard in court, the world saw what had been hidden under decades of control. The public didn't change its mind because of a campaign. It changed because of truth spoken clearly and bravely. The Lord is near to all who call on Him, to all who call on Him in truth. Psalm 45:18. That's what you did. You called on heaven not by begging for revenge, but by standing in truth, and heaven responded by pulling the curtain back. Not because you begged for exposure, but because exposure is the automatic reaction when truth walks into the room. You removed their power source. You unplugged the illusion. So, let me ask you, what if their spiraling isn't just drama, but spiritual confirmation that the stronghold has broken? What if the very chaos you're witnessing is proof that truth has won? You didn't go hunting for vengeance. You didn't create this storm. You just told the truth, and that alone revealed how chaotic, how insecure, how unstable they truly are without control. The very weapon they used against you, fear, silence. Manipulation is now malfunctioning in their hands. They could have kept their dignity. They could have let the truth rise and simply stepped back. But their need to dominate, to rewrite, to bury what really happened, that's what destroyed them. And you're still standing, still clear, still chosen. You didn't just break their control, you revealed their condition. And now, the world sees what they tried so hard to hide. Number 8. You didn't just speak, you broke a generational curse that was counting on your silence. Chosen one. Let this sink in. What you did wasn't just bold, it was bloodline, altering. You weren't simply venting. You weren't just having a moment of emotional honesty. What you did, whether you realized it or not, was sacred intervention. Your voice cut through centuries of silence, secrecy, and survival. And it did what years of denial couldn't. It broke a system that had disguised itself as normal for far too long. The cycle was programmed to run through you. Abuse passed off as discipline, silence mistaken for strength, shame inherited like property. People called it family tradition. But heaven knew it as a curse coded in repetition, and it had been operating like clockwork, transferring trauma from parent to child, from elder to youth, from generation to generation. That pattern didn't expect you. It didn't see you coming. It thought it had another willing host. But then you did something revolutionary. You told the truth. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. That moment, when you spoke, changed everything, not just for you, but for everyone connected to you. The weight that had lived in your bloodline for decades met its match in your courage, because when you called it what it really was, abuse, manipulation, neglect, silence, dysfunction, you interrupted the algorithm. You caught the code mid-sequence, and in that sacred breath, you declared, "This ends with me." Do you ever wonder why healing has felt so heavy? Why it seems like your journey has been lonelier, more emotionally draining, more spiritually intense than most? It's because you're not just healing yourself, you're healing backwards and forwards. You're reaching into ancestral pain and rewriting patterns that would have reached into your children's lives. You are literally unthreading lies that were sown into your blood. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone. The new is here. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Let's pause here. What if your voice is the most powerful spiritual tool your entire family line has ever seen? What if your truth moment was heaven's answer to generations of silent cries? Because when you lit up that dark system with the light of awareness, healing didn't just begin, it erupted. Cycles started short-circuiting. Spirits that fed off silence began to scatter. Demons that hid behind tradition got exposed. Look at someone like Viola Davis, who spoke publicly about the abuse, poverty, and trauma she faced growing up. Her words didn't just inspire healing, they carved out a new narrative for those who came from the same background. Or think of Tyler Perry, who turned a childhood of pain into a platform of transformation, using his voice and work to bring deliverance to millions. These aren't just stories. They're modern blueprints of what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. Isn't that what you've done? They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Revelation Shtim, Isra, Echat Isra. You didn't ask to be the one. In fact, everything came against you to stop you from becoming that person. The attacks weren't random. The resistance wasn't coincidence. The emotional warfare you endured wasn't just about your individual journey, it was about your assignment. Because the system sensed it. You were different. You weren't going to fall in line. You weren't going to call abuse love just because it came from someone older. You weren't going to protect dysfunction just because it shared your last name. You were the one who saw through it and had the divine nerve to name it. Do you realize how rare that is? Most people protect the cycle because it's all they know. But you brought light into the darkness. And now the system is glitching. The spirits that once moved freely are now panicking. Why? Because you exposed them. The silence that once acted like armor for abusers now echoes with your truth. And it's loud enough to be heard by future generations. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion. And instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. Isaiah 61:7. Yes, chosen one. Inheritance. You're creating a spiritual inheritance that those after you will walk into without ever knowing what it cost you. Your children, or even strangers watching from afar, will live with clarity, boundaries, and freedom because you paid the price to speak. You didn't just survive the trauma, you interrupted its reign. And because of that, they will never have to fight the same demons you did. Think of author and speaker Lysa TerKeurst. She took personal pain and betrayal and turned it into a testimony that now equips countless others with language for forgiveness, boundaries, and emotional clarity. That's exactly what you're doing, even if your platform is smaller. Your ripple is divine. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives. Isaiah 61:1. You are fulfilling that scripture by simply being honest. Your honesty is revival. Your courage is deliverance. You are not just speaking, you are declaring war on what once passed as normal. You are standing in the middle of the battlefield, not with bitterness, but with spiritual authority, declaring, "This curse ends here. This dysfunction stops now." And yes, people are uncomfortable. The ones who benefited from your silence are shifting. The ones who felt powerful because you stayed small are rattling. But guess what? The next generation is watching. They are seeing you build something sacred. They are hearing a different story. They are being shaped by your refusal to carry what was never yours to begin with. So, what if your healing is the beginning of someone else's inheritance? What if your one decision to speak truthfully is planting seeds of freedom in people you'll never meet? You didn't just disrupt a cycle. You rewrote a legacy. You didn't just heal, you changed history. And that, chosen one, is what being called truly looks like. Number 9. You humiliated hell's agenda by speaking up, and now your voice is breaking chains across generations. God's chosen one. You need to understand the level of warfare that was launched against you. Wasn't ordinary, it was orchestration. From the moment you came into this world, hell had a file on your name. A spiritual strategy was drafted not just to hurt you, but to silence you. Why? Because the enemy knew something you didn't fully grasp yet. Your voice carried keys, not just for your own freedom, but for many others. The entire strategy was to keep your mouth shut, your heart weary, and your mind confused, so you'd never unlock the prison they carefully built around your calling. But here's the real truth. You were never weak. You were dangerous, and the enemy knew it. So they attacked, through lies whispered behind your back and shouts screamed to your face, through betrayals that came from people you trusted most, through long, quiet seasons where everything you did seemed to backfire. They wanted to drain your energy with endless battles until you would say, "Maybe I should just stay quiet." Have you ever wondered why you were often misunderstood, even when you told the truth with a pure heart? No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Isaiah 54:17. That wasn't coincidence. That was spiritual warfare. Hell's strategy was to make you question yourself so deeply that you'd never step into the voice God designed for you to use. And when isolation hit, when you felt like no one saw, no one understood, that's when the darkness rejoiced. They assumed that if they kept you lonely long enough, shame would do their work for them. But chosen one, you didn't fold. You didn't vanish. You did something more powerful than any physical retaliation. You spoke up. You didn't need a platform or applause. You didn't wait until it was safe. You spoke when it was costly, when it was risky, when it would have been easier to hide. You testified, and in doing so, you didn't just win a battle, you humiliated hell's entire strategy. Think about that. You turned the very thing they used to destroy you into a weapon that now destroys them. How many people do you think have been waiting for someone like you to speak first? They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Revelation 12:11. Let's talk about this. Do you remember Monica Lewinsky? They tried to shame her into permanent silence. The whole world weaponized gossip against her. But she eventually reclaimed her voice and now teaches others how to survive public shaming and reclaim agency. That's a voice turned into victory. Or Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in a prison cell. They hoped the silence of those walls would crush him, But when he emerged, he used his voice to lead a nation. The strategy to break him backfired and exposed the inhumanity of apartheid. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. Isaiah 61:1, chosen one. That's the kind of echo your voice carries. You didn't just survive spiritual prison, you opened the door for others. Hell didn't fear your survival. Hell feared your speech, because surviving silently still serves their agenda. But when a chosen one testifies, when you name the lie, expose the tactic, and speak the truth out loud, you unleash a frequency that shatters the strongholds built on secrecy and shame. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. Can I ask you something? Have you noticed how things began to shift when you finally used your voice? People got uncomfortable. Old patterns started to glitch. Suddenly, things that used to control you began to lose their power. Why? Because you've been anointed not just to survive darkness, but to embarrass it. You flipped the entire agenda. What was crafted to bury you became your platform. The pain that was supposed to paralyze you became your fuel. And now, demons that once celebrated your pain are trembling because your words have become swords. Let's reflect on Terry Crews, who publicly shared his experience with assault in a culture that mocked male victims. His truth wasn't just for him, it unlocked healing for thousands who thought they were alone. That's not weakness. That's divine warfare. Or Rosa Parks. All it took was one quiet refusal to move. Her act wasn't loud, but her voice roared through generations. She exposed injustice without shouting and forever altered the course of civil rights. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. Your voice, chosen one, carries that same frequency. When you speak up, systems crack. When you tell the truth, principalities panic. When you testify, strongholds shake. Let me ask you this. Do you really believe your survival was random? Or is it possible that God preserved you for this very moment, for such a time as this? Chadwick Boseman worked while battling cancer, never using his diagnosis for pity, but instead delivering powerful performances that became his legacy. His silence about his suffering didn't mean weakness, it meant he chose to speak through his art. And now, that legacy still speaks. You've been chosen to do the same. Not everyone will understand your boldness. Some will misinterpret it. But here's what matters most. You're not speaking to please people. You're speaking to disarm principalities. You didn't just overcome the darkness, you humiliated it. And every time you open your mouth now, the sound echoes through spiritual realms as a reminder. The one we tried to shut down now has the mic. M4. And this time, hell can't take it back. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. Deuteronomy 31:6. So, chosen one, don't stop. Speak even louder. Say what others are afraid to say. You weren't given that voice to be polite. You were given that voice to proclaim freedom. You didn't just survive hell. You embarrassed it and made sure it could never touch you the same way again. Number 10. The moment you spoke, you became a mirror they couldn't escape. God's chosen one. The moment your voice broke the silence, something irreversible happened, not just in your story, but in theirs. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't curse or accuse or try to play the hero. No, you simply told the truth. And that truth, it landed like thunder in a quiet room. It cracked through years of self-deception, shattered the illusions they clung to, and forced them to see something they'd spent years running from, themselves. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable people become around quiet strength? Why do you think so many prefer lies wrapped in politeness over truth delivered with grace? When you finally spoke, it wasn't to destroy anyone, it was to reclaim your own clarity. But what made your words so powerful wasn't just what you said, it was what your truth reflected back to them. You didn't just speak, you held up a spiritual mirror, and it showed them everything they never wanted to confront. For so long, they had written a script where they were the heroes and you were the villain. They told themselves they were patient, tolerant, misunderstood. They painted you as unstable, overly sensitive, the one who just couldn't handle reality. But how fragile does a lie have to be if a single sentence from your mouth can bring their whole story crashing down, as it is written in John 8:32? Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. What they didn't realize is that the truth doesn't just set the oppressed free, it also exposes the oppressor. And in your case, the truth wasn't laced with venom. It was spoken with a calm, undeniable authority. That's why it pierced so deeply. Think of whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, the former Facebook employee who revealed internal documents that shook the entire tech industry, or Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, whose testimony before the Senate wasn't loud or aggressive, it was quiet, composed, and deeply unsettling because of its clarity. When a person speaks calmly, factually, and without embellishment, their words carry the weight of something higher than human drama. They echo with divine justice. So ask yourself, why did your presence suddenly make them squirm? Why did your truth cause such panic when they claim to have nothing to hide? Because the mirror doesn't lie. Your voice became a mirror they couldn't smash or ignore. And in that mirror, they didn't see a villain. They saw the manipulation they used, the deflection, the subtle gaslighting, the coldness, the moments where they chose self-image over integrity. Your truth unearthed their shadow self, and there's no makeup, no PR stunt, no self-justification strong enough to cover what you exposed. Proverbs 10:9 reminds us, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. That's exactly what happened. You didn't go looking to tear them down. You simply told the truth, and it lit up every crooked corner they thought they'd buried. Now, every time your name comes up in conversation, they flinch, not because you slandered them, but because your words outed the false image they tried to project for years. And that's what's haunting them. You didn't ruin them. You revealed them. Your voice did what no amount of conflict could do. It destroyed the narrative they built brick by brick. It pulled down the curtain and left them exposed. They can't unsee the reflection you handed them. And now, they live in the discomfort of truth. They cannot erase. Just like Martin Luther, who in 1517 posted his 95 Theses and simply described the corruption he saw in the church. He wasn't trying to destroy religion. He was simply holding up a mirror, and what followed? An entire reformation. Or think of Malala Yousafzai, who with one speech put a mirror in front of an entire regime. What makes truth so dangerous is that it can't be argued with once it's been spoken. You've done the same on your own scale, in your own world, in your own quiet but thunderous way. Isaiah 30:10-11 says, they say to the seers, see no more visions, and to the prophets, give us no more visions of what is right, tell us pleasant things. Prophétie illusion. But chosen one, You didn't give them illusions. You gave them the reality they prayed would never be uttered aloud. You didn't embellish. You didn't dramatize. You told what happened, and the simplicity of your story became their undoing. Because the truth didn't need dressing up, it was damning enough on its own. Why do you think they avoid you now? Why can't they look you in the eye? Because your presence reminds them of the mirror they're still trying to smash. Every room you walk into now echoes with the unspoken reminder of what was exposed. And yet, you are not the destroyer. You are the light. You didn't come with fire, you came with clarity. And clarity is terrifying to those who have lived in performance. Look at Prince Harry, who stepped away from the royal family, not with rage but with testimony. The discomfort it caused, that was truth rearranging centuries of narrative. You did something similar. You walked away without apology. You told your truth without hate. And still, your absence speaks as loudly as your voice once did. Ephésiens 5, 11-us have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. You didn't declare war. You exposed what they kept in the dark. And now, the burden of exposure is not yours to carry, it's theirs to reckon with. Even if they never say it out loud, they know. Even if they keep performing, smiling, posturing, they know. The mirror never left. It travels with them now, and every lie they repeat must now fight against the echo of your voice, the one that said, clearly and calmly, this is what really happened. Then, just like Oprah Winfrey, who for decades gave people a platform to speak their truth and dismantle shame, your presence has become a vessel of awakening, and now others are waking up because you spoke. You didn't just free yourself, you've started setting others free. 2 Corinthians 13:8 tells us, for we cannot do anything against the truth, but only for the truth. What does this mean for you, chosen one? It means your power isn't in confrontation, it's in reflection. The war you fought wasn't to get revenge, it was to release the truth. And the truth always has a ripple effect. So the next time they run from you, remember this, they're not running from a person, they're running from a reflection, and eventually, they'll have to stop and face it, because the mirror you held up wasn't a weapon, it was a mercy. And mercy, when spoken by the chosen, can feel like judgment to the guilty. Number 11. You spoke what others were too afraid to even whisper, and the world is still trembling because of it. Chosen one. There was a silence so heavy. It suffocated everyone who lived inside it. People around you were aching beneath the weight of secrets, dysfunction, generational pain, and quiet injustice. They felt it in their bones, in their spirits, in their very breath. They saw the lies, but kept their heads down. They felt the abuse, but played their part. They watched the manipulation, but smiled to survive. For years, they waited for someone brave enough to say the one thing that had been burning in all their throats, but never spoken. And then came you. Why you? Why now? Because God appointed you to do what others couldn't. Not because they were weak, but because they were still in chains. But you were chosen to speak while still healing. You were chosen to declare truth even when your voice trembled. You weren't picked for your perfection, you were picked because your obedience had fire in it. Let me ask you, have you ever wondered why your words felt heavier than others? Why, when you spoke, the room shifted? Why some applauded, but others recoiled? It's because you carried their unspoken truth too. Your voice didn't just belong to you. It was the release they'd been praying for. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John Shmona Shloshim v'shtayim. You didn't step onto a stage. You stepped into a battlefield. And the moment you opened your mouth, the war changed. You weren't supposed to say anything. Remember, you were supposed to follow the family script. Blend in at church. Smile at dysfunction. Keep the peace at work. But you did what the crowd feared. You named the demon in the room. You didn't decorate it. You didn't whisper. You called it out and it trembled. What happens when the chosen one speaks the truth nobody else will? Earthquakes, conviction, shifting, revival, and yes, backlash. Because truth is powerful, but truth from a chosen one, that's nuclear. Take Rosa Parks. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She sat, and in that silent defiance, she spoke volumes. Others were too afraid to say. What you did was no different. Your action, your voice, your truth, it exposed the systems built on fear. Or consider Anthony Bourdain. In his later years, he became a voice for those unseen, exposing exploitation, grief, and the pain hidden behind polished appearances. His boldness triggered conversations people had dodged for decades. Just like you, he voiced what others only dared to feel. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you, wherever you go. Joshua 1. No. How many people around you now breathe deeper because you went first? How many souls found language for their pain because you gave it form? You may never know. Some will thank you. Some will resent you. But the heavens recorded it all, and the ripple is eternal. Your truth-telling disrupted the illusion of safety. You didn't whisper in private, you declared in daylight. That's why it shook them so deeply. Because truth that hides can be ignored, but truth that walks upright in the room commands a response. Think of whistleblowers like Erin Brockovich, who stood against billion-dollar corruption. She wasn't a lawyer, but she had the truth. And the truth doesn't need credentials, it just needs courage. That same spirit lives in you. Or Malala Yousafzai, who simply said, "Girls deserve to go to school." That sentence could have cost her life. It nearly did. But it also changed nations, and that's the thing about you. Chosen one, you may not realize it yet, but your sentence set someone else free. The Lord is on my side, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Psalm 118:6. The ones who resent you now, it's not hate, it's reflection. Your voice reflected a version of themselves they're not ready to be. You reminded them of the vow they broke with their own soul. You didn't mean to convict them, but truth always brings exposure. You gave courage a voice. You made silence feel cowardly. You made hiding feel like betrayal. And while some celebrate your strength, others distance themselves not because they despise you, but because they despise their own silence. Wasn't that true of Martin Luther King Jr.? His words still echo not because they were loud, but because they were undeniable. He was hated for saying what the world didn't want to admit. But history remembers the voice that shattered fear. And you, yes, you have that same mantle. Your truth has legacy stitched into its syllables. The righteous are as bold as a lion. Proverbs 28:1. Now the question is, can you keep standing while they throw stones? Can you keep speaking when your voice is shaking? Can you be the echo that wakes others up? Even if it means being lonely at first. God didn't ask you to be popular, He asked you to be faithful. Because chosen ones don't whisper, they roar. And even when you're quiet, your silence is thunderous. You are a sound barrier breaker. A silence destroyeur. A voice the enemy hoped would never rise. And now, just like Maya Angelou, who wrote, "Still, I rise." You too have become a symbol, not just of survival, but of sacred truth-telling. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he hath redeemed from the hand of the enemy. Psalm Ma Vesheba Ashtaim. Your life, your story, your truth. It didn't just cause a stir, it started a revolution, and while others are still whispering behind closed doors, your voice has already crossed borders, entered hearts, and planted seeds of awakening. Let them whisper, let them hide. You've already spoken, and heaven heard you, because when the chosen one speaks, even silence listens. Number 12. They thought discrediting you would mute the truth, but it only amplified it. God's chosen one. You need to know this clearly. Their plan was never to argue with what you said it was, to dismantle who you are. Why? Because they realized early on that the truth you carried wasn't something they could challenge directly. It was too solid, too backed by evidence, too uncomfortable. So, instead of contending with your message, they targeted the messenger. They believed that if they could twist your image, they could distort your truth. But they underestimated something powerful. You weren't speaking for applause, you were speaking from alignment with God. They tried to play an old game, discredit the truth teller, and maybe the truth will go down with them. They wanted to reduce your divine assignment to a personality flaw. Wasn't that the same trick they used on prophets of old? Think about Jeremiah, who was thrown into a cistern, Jeremiah 38:6. Not because his prophecy was false, but because it was too true. Have you ever wondered why people attack character when they can't counter facts? They labeled you too emotional. They said, unstable, bitter, too loud, too dramatic. You've heard it all, haven't you? But each label was just a smokescreen to distract others from the sharpness of your truth. Instead of dealing with what you said, they went for your reputation, hoping that if they could stain your name, they could sterilize your impact. But what happened instead? No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. Isaiah 54:17. The very lies they spread became the megaphone God used to project your truth further than they ever intended. The moment they spoke your name in mockery, others got curious. Who is this person they're trying so hard to destroy? They asked. And when those people actually stopped and listened to your words, they didn't hear insanity. They heard insight, not a tantrum, but testimony, not chaos, but clarity. How can someone unstable articulate cause and effect with such depth? Why does someone too emotional describe events with such precision? Think about Meghan Markle, discredited by tabloids, ridiculed, even painted as divisive, yet the more they tried to silence her, the more her voice echoed globally. Or whistleblowers like Frances Haugen from Facebook, called dramatic at first, but her evidence was undeniable. Why? Because truth has a frequency that can't be cancelled. It keeps reverberating long after the noise dies down. Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Galatians 4:16. You didn't lash out in rage. You responded with rooted revelation. Your voice didn't tremble with confusion. It was anchored in lived experience. And your message began to resonate, not just with the wounded, but with the watchers. Those who had been silently observing from the sidelines suddenly began to shift in their seats. Some started re-watching your videos. Others reread your posts. A few even shared your words anonymously. Afraid, but undeniably moved. Just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was branded as a troublemaker. communist, and dangerous radical, only for history to eventually magnify his truth. Or like Malala Yousafzai, who was shot for speaking about education but became a Nobel Peace Prize winner instead. What is it about truth tellers that makes the fearful panic? Could it be that your clarity exposes their control? For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. They assumed your isolation would diminish you. They thought, if enough people called you crazy, you'd start believing it. But instead of shrinking, you sharpened. Instead of retreating, you remembered why you were chosen in the first place. You stopped needing approval to speak and started realizing you were anointed to be loud for those who couldn't be. Have you ever noticed how some people's crazy sounds a lot like clear when time passes? Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years, branded a terrorist, unstable, dangerous. But when he emerged, the world didn't hear bitterness. They heard the voice of freedom, just like they hear you now, just like they'll remember you later. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. John 8:32. Here's the twist they didn't see coming. The smear campaign became your marketing strategy. The rumors became redirection signs leading people straight to your content. Your mission, your voice, rooms you never entered started quoting you. Phrases you casually spoke in fire became rallying cries in other cities. People whispered your name at first, but now they're declaring your message. Why? Because truth is magnetic. It tugs at something eternal inside us. It doesn't just inform, it transforms. That's why your truth keeps traveling. You didn't just create a moment, you created movement. Look at Rosa Parks. Her simple act of defiance was immediately discredited by some as disrespectful. But that one act was enough to shift a civil rights revolution. Or consider Amanda Gorman Young. Putich. Unassuming, yet one sentence from her inauguration poem circled the globe. Why? Because truth wrapped in divine timing is louder than any scandal. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm 27:1. They tried to tear down your credibility, but they only gave your voice a bigger platform. They thought calling you too much would make people walk away, but instead, it made people lean in. They didn't realize they weren't muting you. They were amplifying your assignment. And while they were busy trying to bury your name, God was busy resurrecting your influence. So here's the question. Are you ready for the people who are coming to you now because of what they once feared? Can you hold space for the ones who laughed yesterday but lean in today? Are you prepared for the rooms that are suddenly quoting the very thing you were condemned for saying? But as for you, be strong and do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. 2 Chroniques 15:7. You didn't need a PR team. You needed obedience. You needed fire. You needed boldness. And now, while their noise fades into the background, your clarity echoes louder than ever. God's chosen one. You weren't just protected, you were projected, you were broadcasted. And now the world is beginning to realize the truth didn't need their approval. It just needed your voice. Now your story echoes louder than ever, and the very people who tried to shut you up are choking on the volume. Chosen one. Let this be your confirmation. Your voice was never small. It was simply ahead of its time. You weren't loud for attention. You were clear for liberation. And now the same truth they tried to strangle is roaring through halls, boardrooms, pulpits, and platforms where your name is spoken with awe, envy, or repentance, whether they admit it or not. You shifted the conversation. You changed the atmosphere. You redefined what it means to stand up when it's easier to sit down. Every time someone repeats your words, every time another silent soul finds courage through what you survived, you are multiplying light in a world that tried to keep you in darkness. So, thank you. Thank you for staying true when it cost you comfort. Thank you for walking through that fire alone so others could learn they weren't crazy, they were just early. And thank you, most of all, for being here, watching, listening, resonating, and journeying with this message. If this message blessed you and you feel led to support this mission, you're welcome to send a super thanks below. Whether it's a seed or a silent prayer, it matters. And let me be clear, whether you donate or not, your presence here is deeply valued just by being here. You've shown that you're part of a rising remnant, bold, called, and chosen. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He shine His face upon you and give you peace. May your voice continue to break barriers, awaken others, and stir heaven. And may the same fire that tried to destroy you become the flame that lights your next victory. Your words were never wasted. Your truth is still rippling, and your name is still ringing. You didn't just speak, you sparked a revolution.